Welcome to RealCast, the weekly roundup of the real asset markets. My name's Richard Betts and I'm joined by Nicol Dynes and Ron van Bloois. And we'll also have a special focus on senior housing. But let's start with the roundup of the week. Nicol, what have you been following this week?
There were two big announcements in Italy. As we know, Italy is having a very difficult time in the market after the coronavirus outbreak. But there are positive signs that activity is coming back to the market. Canadian pension fund PSB Investment has joined the Australian company Lendlease, and together they're developing a 2.5 billion mixed-use regeneration scheme in Milan, in Santa Giulia. Now, Lendlease had been involved with this for a number of years, but what is significant that the Canadians are now joining them with a 50% stakes worth over €1 billion. So it's a significant sign of belief in this project, which is near Linate Airport. It's going to have 2,500 homes. It's going to have offices, including the headquarters of Sky, and it's going to have entertainment and sporting areas, including a sporting arena, which is going to be used for the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan. So it's very much a sort of long-term view they're taking. And the other announcement this week was that Scanel Properties, a US company, has invested an undisclosed sum to develop a huge logistics park right next to Bologna Airport, so right in the middle of Italy and in a great location right next to the A1, the main motorway. So I think these two themes point to something that is not just happening in Italy, but in the rest of Europe, mixed use, regeneration, and the logistics being the two things investors are going for, and the return of international investors to the European market.
Yeah, and those are definitely themes I think that we've seen coming up in our interviews repeatedly, and also in the event sessions we've been running. Ron, obviously based in the Dutch market, what have you been seeing in terms of themes?
After the cancellation of MIPIM and the transformation of Expo Real into a hybrid version, Provada announced that they will have a meeting in November, but without stands. So only focus on keynotes, expert meetings, and networking. And next to this, we've already seen that all the real estate fairs are going digital. So the Provada Live, but also the Real Estate Future Proof was a great example of showing inspirational activities like wooden building concepts, smart and healthy buildings, but also an important discussion about the valuation on economic value. And when you look at the commercial real estate, well, I think the concerns are increasing in Europe. Of course, retail is suffering heavily because of the consumer behavior related to COVID-19, but also the demand of offices is declining. For example, research of Cushman & Wakefield shows us 20% less take-up of office spaces in the Netherlands in half one 2020 in comparison to previous years. So these are big declining numbers. On the other hand, the more residential side, we've seen an interesting comeback of Roundhill. They did a portfolio deal of roughly 820 apartments divided over 14 assets. So this is positive news in weeks where we were dominated by discussions about regulations, rental caps, and lockdown.
Interesting to see, particularly as well, Provada moving to that kind of hybrid position. And certainly that's something that we're seeing, and we've been working on RealX Global in order to be able to create that, but also look at what you can achieve in the virtual space that maybe you can't in the physical space, especially given that a lot of the conversations I've been having with people are they're intending to cut their business travel. And that also picks up a topic that I think we've been looking at a lot, which is that sustainability side, ESG coming through. And I noticed that Tritax were announcing that all future new buildings within their portfolio would be constructed to net zero. And as well, I was having a discussion with Thomas Veit, who's the new head of real assets for Germany at PwC. And this came out clearly as well for them, that focus on ESG, low carbon. We were looking particularly in terms of the events this week, Nicol, at senior living and senior housing. What were some of your, I suppose, key takeaways from that?
Well, the event was on French senior housing, and the French market is one of the most mature and sophisticated in Europe. At the briefing, there was a presentation of a new report, which remarkably is the first research report, in-depth look at the market, which was done by BONARD and Mozaic Asset Management to get some reliable data for the first time on the market, to bring transparency into the sector, which will obviously help investors to want to invest in the sector, and also to start a process which should be continued in other countries. BONARD and Mosaic are also working now on a similar report, which will be presented later in the year on the German market. And the idea is to, again, do a spotlight on various markets to bring transparency. But on the French market, the picture is very much one of growing demand and lack of supply. And it's particularly remarkable in France because there is quite a big pipeline. There are 285 projects on the go, but they're not nearly enough to keep up with growing demand. And they mentioned in particular what they call the future seniors. So the 60 to 74-year-old population will increase by 25% over the next 5 years. So it's not just people who are now 75 and over with the current market, but the future market is set to increase exponentially. So it is clear from the data that demand will increase and that supply has to increase. So there's huge opportunities for investors to enter the market, which at the moment is dominated by French investors that account for 70% of transactions.
I was very delighted as a chairman and co-founder of the Senior Housing and Healthcare Association to see this thoroughness of the research using unbiased data and various research methods. It was very impressive. And next to gaining insights on demand, transaction, yields, and pipeline, they also clarified various types or typologies of senior living establishments. So that was very useful. The research shows us the immense senior population growth. And of course, we've got some challenges, especially regarding the land scarcity. And it's the importance of affordability, because that's quite important for the senior residents, that they can afford the rent. And indeed, it's a clear fact that we've got an enormous lack of supply to meet the growing demand for assisted living residents. It underlines the potential of the French market, but indeed actually the European market, because when you look at the Nordics, Germany, but also UK, Benelux, the potential is huge. So it underlines the opportunities for private and institutional investors.
Ron, you were mentioning that there's less interest in offices in the Netherlands. And on that theme, again, it was mentioned that because of the shortage of supply in senior housing, they're now repurposing office buildings in Paris in order to have more product and in more quickly, because planning regulations are pretty slow in France. That's an interesting development as well, this repurposing of assets.
I also did an interview with Arthur Jennings of Fortwell Capital, who are lending into this market, particularly in the UK. They've been seeing growing demand from investors. Interestingly, they're also part of large US group Kane International. I've also been hearing separately in the market a lot around US investors, particularly looking at the European market at the moment. And I think that'll be something that's interesting to watch. Ron, from your point of view, how are you seeing the Dutch market, particularly at the moment in terms of this senior living space?
Yeah, we see much more consolidation. So on the operator side, smaller operators are working more closely together. The big operators like Corian doing mergers and acquisition of smaller operators. We see a lot of redevelopment of current portfolio. So totally agree with Nicol, sometimes from the sustainability perspective, but also in terms of old-fashioned building to repurpose it or upgrade it. And on the deal flow side, we see much more portfolio deals. So therefore, also the attention of institutional investors is rising because they are attracted by size and impact. And therefore, senior living or senior housing ticks all the boxes. And the potential is huge. It's getting more and more attention worldwide.
Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week for our roundup of the key themes in real assets. And we'll take a special look at retail and German residential. Thank you.